All right, we're back at our cabinet, and what we're going to do is build some corner trim to cover the edge. The corner trim is going to be kind of L-shaped like this. Either one, we have two options. One is to do a square edge, the other is to do a radius, whatever you'd prefer on that for your trim. The trim is going to run the full length of the face frame there, and is going to just wrap that front edge and cover up where the face frame and the plywood box meet. You can see we're probably 3/8 of an inch over that line. Now, if you have some defects or things like that, you could make this a little bit wider. We are limited based on how high the saw blade will cut when we do that. So we're going to start with some 1.5 inch wide pieces of material. I actually have these cut 28 inches long. That's the whole height of my cabinet. But you could, if you have some smaller pieces, use those as well. But we're starting at 1.5 inch wide, and we're leaving them as thick as possible. They both need to be the same before we get started here. So 15/16 are what these are at. We're going to take these first to our wide belt sander, and we're going to sand these down to get all the saw blade marks off, things like that, burn marks off before we start to work these. So a good idea with these to measure with the caliper to make sure you get your machine set right. Make sure it zeroes out before you start measuring, and then go ahead and take your measurements. So I'm just about 1.55 that way, and this direction I'm 0.9. So we're going to set our machine. We're going to actually run these through the sander both directions. We're going to sand them like this and clean up both faces, and we're going to stand them on edge and clean up both edge surfaces. All right, we're back at the router table. Now this is the point where if you want to leave these these trim pieces square, you would be done at this point. You'd go orbital sand them and get them cleaned up. Today we're going to make these have a rounded corner. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our smallest, or one of our small round over bits, and we've got this radius here, and we're looking for this radius to be this corner right where my fingernail is, to be just under the workpiece. So if I take one of my workpieces and line it up, you can see that the cutter is actually touching the bottom edge of that cutter is actually touching the workpiece. We're up quite a bit, so we need to lower this down underneath the table. We're going to grab the collar around the motor and lower that down until we get it about where we want it. If you're touching the bit or blade, you should make sure the machine is unplugged. We wouldn't want any accidental startup while you're doing this. So once we got it right where we want, where the edge of that slope is just under our workpiece, at that point then we'll lock it in place and we'll start getting this set up a little bit more further. We're going to need the fence in place, so we're going to pull that up. I'm going to hold the workpiece up above the cutter so that I'm riding on just the bearing there, and then I can pull the fence up and tighten that up. That will make me nice and tight against the bearing. So the fence will be even with the bearing. Either one will be setting our depth. We're going to be running these through the machine against the direction of the cutter head. We're going to use our push block to keep our hands at a safe distance away as we run this. and we're going to do all 4 long edges. So we're going to run it, we can flip it over, run it, and then we're going to have to turn it around and run it and flip it over and run it to get all 4 long edges. So we've routed all 4 long straight edges, even though we're only going to need 3 corners for this trim. This allows us, if we have any bad spots, to cut off one side. So I like to just go ahead and router all 4 long edges, and then after we're done, we can determine if there's one that is bad. We're going to go over to the sanding table and orbital sand the radius here and get any burn marks and mill marks off, so that when we're done cutting these, we'll be good to install them. We're ready to cut these apart. We're going to use the table saw, and for this operation the guard is going to need to be removed. And so in the classroom, your instructor would need to make this cut for you. Your teacher or myself may ask you to remove the guard ahead of time to save up some class time, things like that, for the instructor to help other students. So go ahead and remove your guard. Yours might be a little different, but ours is pretty simple. Just pull out the throat plate and pull out the guard and close it all up. Okay, my height. I'm going to have my blade height set so that I'm just about maybe about a 1/4 inch underneath the outside height of the wood. So I need to go up just slightly a little bit here. I don't want to get too thin on this. And I'm going to set my fence to 3/16 of an inch, typically is what I like to do. And have your push stick ready. I'm going to look down my workpiece and see if there's any bow. Rather than me trying to push tight against the fence and keep it tight, I'm going to turn it so my curve kind of goes this way, if there is one. That way I can easily keep it against the fence as we cut. The other thing I'm looking for is any bad edges in my radius. So if I look down here, feel them, whatever you want to do, feeling if there's any bad spots. If there is, when we get ready to cut this, I'm going to put any bad spots down and out towards the outside of the blade. That way they get cut off when I use them, or when I cut them. Now I'm going to set my blade height. I'm going to lay my piece of wood down, and I'm going to set my blade height so that I am cutting into my workpiece. I want to make sure I cut a little bit past this cut here so that when I'm done, I'm left with no material inside. If you have your blade set too low, you could be left with a little ridge of material that you will then have to chisel or sand out, and it becomes difficult. So we're going to set the blade height. All right, we really get one shot to make this cut. If we get it cut and we're not right, what's going to happen is we're not going to be able to hold it up against the fence. It's going to want to move on us. So as we're cutting, we want to make sure that this line we're not left with any little material left over when we're done. So we're going to make sure our blade is plenty high so that we don't be left with something we've got to sand later on. Okay, we're plenty high. We could be a little bit lower and be good still. We don't want to get too weak on this outside edge. When we're done, we should have two pieces. Our inside piece, or the piece we want here, you can see that little notch gives us plenty of clearance. There's no material left over in there. That's what we're looking for. This piece will actually, if you want to make some tiny 1/4 inch round over trim, this piece works nice for that. You could router the other edge, get it all ready, and your instructor can cut that apart for you as well. All right, when you're done, these two should easily come apart. You'll notice that we have plenty of clearance on here, that we've got a little line cut in there. It's what we want. We don't want any material left over right on that little ridge, okay? This piece here, your fall off or scrap piece, makes a good piece that we can take it down a little bit thinner around the other edge, and we can make some of this really tiny 1/4 inch round trim. And this works nice for especially on top of your feet or your mitered trim if you have any gaps to help cover that up. So back here at our project, we're going to try to get the best measurement we can here. And so I'm going to take my tape measure and hold it against this bottom foot, and we're going to bring it up to about where the top is. Now I'm at a slight angle, so I'm going to have it a little bit long, but we're at about 25 inches. That one's about 25 1/16. So I'm going to start big. I can always cut it again, but if you cut it small, then we're going to have a gap on the top or bottom. So go ahead and get it cut to the size you need. When we're cutting our trim, we're going to cut it just like our other pieces. We're going to cut a little off one side so it's square, and then flip it over and cut the other end off so it's also square to our size. I kind of like to hold it like this so there's a small angle along the front edge. That's fine. That way it's nice and thin down here. There's no material that needs to be supported. And then we'll just flip it over and cut the other side. For now, I'm just going to cut one of them till I make sure it fits right. Remember, one side was longer than the other, so I don't want to accidentally cut both of them and then have one of them be short if I'm at the wrong size. So we'll go back to the cabinet and check its size. We're going to take the trim and try to fit it in place. We can see this one is just a little bit long. I'm okay with that. At least I didn't cut it short. This side, that is just about a good fit right there. We're nice and tight up along the top. So that's a good fit for that one. We're going to go to the other side and make it just a little bit smaller. So this side got cut just a hair short, maybe a 32nd of an inch. There's a little bit of play. Now, I probably myself would put that play or gap up towards the top of the cabinet, because in all likelihood, a small project like this, you're not going to see this gap unless you're on the floor looking up at the project. So I would probably put that up there, not at the bottom, because you'd be more likely to see that from a distance. We're going to use our pin nailer to attach this trim. The pin nailer is nice for any trim or pieces that could get broken from a regular brad nailer. The pin nailer has these very tiny pins or straight pieces of metal that will hold things very gently in place. Now we use this again when the brad nailer could possibly break the trim, and since our trim is like 3/16 thick, there's a high likelihood that the brad nailer would crack our material. So we're going to get that hooked up. I'm going to take a little bit of glue. The glue is really what does the work. The nails just hold it till the glue dries. And I'm going to put a little bit on here towards the inside so it doesn't ooze out the outside. Plus, when it's up closer to the inside, it's going to smear a little bit onto the front of the project, not just the side. Okay, just a little bead. And then I'm going to push not only back, okay, to keep it tight along the front edge, but I'm also going to push in so we don't have any gap along the back edge. So I'm going to push in and back as we do this. Might be helpful to open the door so you can get a better kind of grip on there. I'm going to shoot 3-4 nails into the side. Okay, if you're worried about those nails pulling out because there's no head, you could shoot a nail in straight and then maybe one at an angle, one back the other way so that they're kind of crisscross, and then you don't really have the option to pull it off. I'm going to pull the door off so I can apply a little bit easier pressure to the other side. I'm going to put my glue on there, staying away from that edge. And I'm going to do the same thing, push it back and in. And I'm going to push it tight. Before you install this trim, it might not be a bad idea to do some of your sanding ahead of time. That way we don't have an inside corner where you can't get your sander. If you feel like you've got a little bit of gap on the front side, you could push that in and put a nail into the front side of the trim. I don't like to do that because from the front view where you're going to see the cabinet most of the time, then you would see nail holes up the front. I really try to avoid having any visible fasteners or nails. That small piece that I told you about earlier, that small 1/4 inch round over, you could take that, and where it fit nice is if you have any kind of gap along the top of your foot, rather than trying to put filler in there or anything like that, a small piece of trim like that could sit on top of there real nice. So that's where that 1/4 inch tiny round over would come in place. On this piece, I would put no glue on there, but just shoot pin nails into there. Any type of glue on something this small is going to make a mess. You're going to ooze out the bottom or top. All right, that corner trim is going to be the last little bit that we're going to put on this project. At this point, we'd be good to go start our finishing. That's going to be sanding and prepping for clear coat and stain. Stain typically goes on first, and then you could clear coat over top if you want to do that process.